Hi, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about a simple way to do risk assessments. I'm going to show you two different ways to do a simple risk assessment. And risk assessment is the first thing you want to do before verifying what you need to do about your security, because you need to know what it is you need to secure and why it is important for your company. So, changing to the next slideshow, let's just briefly talk about what is a risk assessment. A risk assessment assesses the potential attacks your system or application or building can suffer. So what could that be in theory? Okay, so in theory, a system, an application, or building are very different things. A building, for example, could be attacked by, let's say, terrorists, or it could be natural disaster, different kind of things, fire, whatever you can think about. Applications or systems in general can be attacked by hackers, other systems, and various different things among that. So whenever you sit with your team, or you're part of your company, or the security team you're a part of, what you're gonna do is to create a risk assessment. So we need to talk about what is your risks and how bad are they and what is the likelihood of them happening. So typically you will create a risk assessment for a bigger system, let's say a web page, a mobile application, or just some external database provider. It could be a cloud provider on Amazon or DigitalOcean or anything else basically. Before you create a risk assessment, you need to have a good understanding of security and what it is that could be a potential risk for that part. So if you have no technical or very little technical insight, I suggest that you talk to your team lead and get some technical guys down there to help you to do the actual assessment. So how would you create a risk assessment? Well, there are 5 different things you need to be aware of. First of all, a description. So what is it that you are thinking or you're assessing your security risk assessments is all about? Is it that you want to secure your web application? And then again, you need to make sure that every single risk inside that overall risk assessment also can be identified by some name to make it easy to understand what it is all about. To give you an example, you could say that in a building, the door could be broken down or the windows could be smashed. 2 different things, 2 different risks, 2 different ways to assess the security on the building. Number 2, the likelihood of this happening. So what is the likelihood of the doors being knocked down or the windows being smashed? Thinking about it, probably not that big. However, if you are living in an area with a lot of people or animals interested in knocking on doors, well, I would say it's probably pretty big, okay? Number 3, the consequence of it happening. So let's assume that the window got smashed. What would happen? How serious is it? You need to think about these kind of things. It has nothing to do with IT in general right now. It's nothing to do with any specific part of information security or anything. Basically, if windows broken down, the weather could change the temperature inside the room. If that room contains some servers, it could make the room more humid, with a high humidity, or it could even get wildlife inside the building, which in theory would lead to some sort of contamination that would not be that good in a room like that, for example. Okay, so the overall risk is you take likelihood and you multiply that with the consequence and you get a product. So if you have a likelihood of 1 and a consequence of 2, that gives the product of 2, so that's a very low risk. This is a typical example of how the risk assessment could look like. This is also called a template model, or just an example of how it is. Looking at the risk descriptions, we see the risk being road by R1, R2, R3, and all the way down to number 6. The R is short for risk. The first one is like increased heat loss by ventilation of the building. This looks like a risk assessment for some sort of building about ventilation and so on. So think about it this way. A risk assessment doesn't necessarily have anything to do with high-tech security, IT, serious programming, blah blah, something like that. It can be basically anything. A ventilation system. We need to be aware that if you are, well, take the example of this. If increased heat loss by ventilation of the building, if that is an actual issue, the likelihood is 4. So this is kind of very high likelihood from 1 to 5. So it's very likely that the increased heat loss by ventilation of the building, meaning that, well, it could mean that that the ventilation stopped working. So what would the consequence be? Now it would be 1. So the overall risk would be 4, and the overall risk is measured from the number of 1 to 25. So that would be categorized as something called low. If you look to the left, you will see the overall numbers describing low, moderate, high, and extreme. So how can that be? How should we think about it? If you use the risk assessment, you will know that, however, if the likelihood is very high of it happening, and your consequence is very low, so it's of no consequence that the ventilation system goes down. Yeah, you might have some sort of, heat loss, but it's not that serious, so it doesn't really matter that much. We just press the button, you call the technician the day after, yeah, it's fine. Alright then. So that's the way of thinking about it. Let's take risk number 4. It says accelerating degradation and shortened durability of the construction. Alright, so that has a likelihood of 4. It's very likely to happen, and the consequence is 5, and the overall risk is 20. This is an extreme risk. Now, when looking at this risk assessment here, I'm thinking, okay, so risk number 4 is something that I constantly need to be aware of. I, of course, also need to be constantly aware of risk 1 through 6. However, the one that I need to be most aware of would be risk number 4, because it has the highest overall risk. This is something that I probably should check on a daily basis or a weekly basis, depending on the components that is a part of creating the likelihood for this risk to happen. So that is one way of creating a risk assessment. Now let me give you another example. Let's assume that we're creating a risk assessment for a web application online. Let's just say any web application created with WordPress. We all know WordPress, I assume. If you don't, WordPress is a content management system you can download for free and create a web page, or in old days called a blog, right? But today it's just web pages you create with WordPress. So the overall risk for, let's say, that someone will try and log in on your account through the admin panel in WordPress, the overall risk for that actually happening, we could create an example for that. So I would say risk 1, WordPress being hacked on the login panel. Alright, I would say the likelihood is probably 1. However, it depends on how well you created your password, and that is a whole other video that I'm not going to go into today. And the consequence of that should probably be 5, so the overall risk would be 5. That would be a low risk. So should you pay attention to your admin panel login and look through log all day long and logs, all day long to check for the traffic going back and forth? Is there any multiple login requests that didn't go good? I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would probably just, implement some sort of plugin that could detect some sort of brute force going on. If you don't know what brute force is, it is a way of trying to log in with different credentials multiple times really, really fast, hundreds of times per second, even faster sometimes. So this is one way of you creating a risk assessment, which is also why I showed you this small template, because it is rather easy to understand. It has nothing to do with high technical stuff, so I hope you will find this to your liking. An example that I just, wrote is that we have a website that is hacked. I know this is a very overall risk. I would say that the overall risk of a website is hacked is probably too overall. So make sure whenever you're creating risks in the risk assessment, make them a bit more general. So the website is hacked. Now we're going to be a bit technical. It could be like SQL injection, find some sort of risk name for that, or it could be that your external database provider is being blocked or something like that. The likelihood of that, it's very difficult for me to say what the likelihood is because I don't know your system, which is why it is so important that you understand your system, you understand the needs for your system, understand the context of your system. The most important of all that is the context. You need to understand where your system is installed, where it's lying, where it's hosted from, what it contains, the security mechanisms, all these kind of different things before you can actually do a likelihood measurement. The consequence again is a bit easy to probably guess. If website is hacked, it's pretty bad. So I would say it's probably 5. The likelihood in this case I set to 1, so the overall risk is 5. It's just an example. It could also be employee tell other outside person about my password policy. Okay, so a risk assessment could also contain human weak spots. What I mean with that is just like we all like to talk, we all like to gossip and gloat about things like, oh, I'm going to my favorite bar and talking to my other favorite colleagues, and someone to the right or to the left might even listen and eavesdrop on you and say like, oh, he talks a lot. So maybe someday you will talk about or gossip about that you just created a new password policy, or there's no new password policy in your company, which basically means that all your password needs to be within 10 to 14 characters containing at least this and that, and maybe there are some static rules to creating that password. For example, that could be that you need to have a large letter in the first letter and so on. Very bad idea to do these kind of things. However, what is the likelihood of an employee gossiping about some password policy? I would rate that pretty high, and the consequence could be pretty bad depending on how it is. So the overall risk is 20. Now, to me as a security professional, I would say I would probably not let employees know about the password policy then, because this is how I would implement a control to mitigate myself out of it. So I would not let the employees know the password policy. I would probably not even let them choose their own password, if this was such a big risk. But sometimes it is a necessity to let the users choose their own password. Alright. So I created a small, how to do with all the different kind of risks you get, different kind of products, the overall risk. If it's 1 to 5, I would do less to nothing, but don't forget about it. Meaning that of course I will not forget about it. Of course I will never just say, oh, this is just a risk, it's just gonna be there, I'm not gonna do anything about it. I would never do that. I would do something like, depending what it is, of course, be aware of the news, be aware of patches, be aware of updates. Some risks can be a number of 1. It's a level 1 risk, which is in the low area. Maybe even the overall risk level is 1. But the other day a new patch arrived, and then that patch or software update contains some sort of flaw that will take the number 1 risk to, let's say, a high risk. So from one day to another, the risk that is overall risked by the risk level 1 is suddenly just now at, let's say, 18. So you need to be aware of patches and software and updates and change of rules, and I probably guess you know what I mean. So if it's a medium, you need to be aware of it a lot. In high level, be extremely thorough about it, and if it's an extreme risk, whatever it takes, right? You just need to get the level down. So here's the idea. It is okay to have extreme risks. Risk assessment is not there for you to take everything down to low. It is simply not possible. Of course, if you have a very simple system, it might be possible to only have low and medium and a few highs. However, it's very normal for most companies, or just stores or whatever it is, to have some extreme, some high, some medium, some low. So you just need to be aware of that. Maybe have some extreme risks, but it doesn't mean that's the end of the world. Just be aware of them and make sure that you do whatever it takes to keep them at the extreme, never to be exploited or used. However, you also need to be aware of that sometimes you need to remove functionality or opportunities or possibilities in order to remove a risk. Sometimes the manager will tell you to do that, or your boss, whatever it's called in your company. So that's another way of using the risk assessment. And your last risk assessment for you, this is a different risk assessment model. It's a little more easy to understand, and it only contains some colors, and this is called the risk assessment matrix. So first of all, you need to assess the difficulty of an attack. It's called the effort, easy, middle, hard. So that's what you're gonna see on the vertical lines. It's the easy, middle, and hard part. Assess the potential consequence. It's called the impact. It's trivial, medium, or serious. That is the horizontal part, which is down below, trivial, medium, and serious. So let's assume you have an easy attack. It's a serious consequence. That is a high risk. Basically telling you to put the marker on the easy and the serious, and whenever they stomp together, they hit in the red area. So that would be a very bad thing to have. This kind of model gives you a way to very, very easy to identify different risks in colors. And when something is in a color, it's easier for others to see that this is a really bad risk you need to take care of. All people, I would say all, know the color red is something that usually means stop, serious, bad. It's a sign you need to be aware of. Where green is good, calming, and this is an area I want to be. And yellow and orange is something that, it could be a potential risk, right? I would say if I should choose one of the two different risk assessment models that I just showed you right now, I would probably use the one we look at right now. It's easy to understand, it's easy to create, it's easy for others to use, and I would say that kind of holds a lot more value than a lot of numbers and the other way. However, sometimes the other way can be a better solution for you because it does contain a lot more information, and sometimes risk can just be difficult to assess, and this model here might be too easy, too mild, too not serious, too not too containing too many information for your company. So depending on your need, you can choose the one or the other. So this was the end of the slideshow where we talked about two different kinds of ways to create risk assessments. I hope that you liked the video. I hope that you will subscribe, like the video, and click the bell. Even comment down below, and I will always reply back to you. So see you again. Bye bye.